June 9th, 2024, a date that will be remembered as the day the financial order that shaped the modern world quietly expired. After 50 years, the Petrodollar agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia officially ended. No dramatic announcement, no emergency UN meetings, no panic in the streets, just silence. But make no mistake, this is the beginning of the end for the greatest financial privilege in human history. For half a century, America has been eating at the world's most expensive restaurant, and other countries have been picking up the tab. That free lunch, it just got cancelled, and the bill is about to come due. So what exactly died in June 2024? Why did this single expired agreement between two countries send shockwaves through financial circles while most people didn't even notice? And more importantly, what happens to America, to your dollar, to your savings, when the system that's allowed the US to print unlimited money without consequence finally collapses? How did one deal with Saudi Arabia in 1974 give America a 50-year economic superpower? And what happens now that it's gone? To understand what just ended, we need to go back to 1974. America was in crisis. The Vietnam War had drained the treasury. Nixon had just ended the gold standard 3 years earlier in 1971, cutting the dollar's link to anything tangible. Inflation was raging. The Middle East was in turmoil. And then came the oil shock. In October 1973, Arab oil producers launched an embargo against nations supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War. Oil prices quadrupled almost overnight. Gas lines stretched for blocks in American cities. The economy contracted. Panic set in. America, for the first time since World War II, felt vulnerable, dependent, weak. But what looked like a crisis became an opportunity for one of the most brilliant financial maneuvers in history. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, working behind the scenes, negotiated a deal with Saudi Arabia that would reshape the global economy for the next 50 years. The agreement was simple, but profound. Saudi Arabia would sell its oil exclusively in US dollars and invest its surplus oil revenues in US Treasury bonds. In exchange, America would provide military protection, weapons, and guaranteed security for the Saudi kingdom. The implications were staggering. Saudi Arabia was the world's largest oil exporter. Once they agreed to dollar-only sales, other OPEC nations followed. Suddenly, every country on Earth that wanted to buy oil, and every country needs oil, had to hold US dollars. It didn't matter if you were Japan buying from Kuwait, or Germany buying from Nigeria, or China buying from Venezuela. The transaction happened in dollars. This created something unprecedented: artificial, permanent global demand for US currency that had nothing to do with America's economic fundamentals. The dollar became not just money, but essential infrastructure for the global economy. Here's where the genius becomes clear. This arrangement allowed America to do something no other nation could: print money without consequence. When other countries print currency, inflation surges and the currency collapses. When America printed dollars, they flowed overseas to satisfy global oil trade demand. The inflation got exported. The purchasing power stayed home. It was quite literally a free lunch. America could run massive trade deficits, buying far more than it sold. It could run huge government budget deficits, spending far more than it collected in taxes. And instead of economic collapse, the world absorbed the excess dollars and actually wanted more of them. Economists called it exorbitant privilege. America's financial position was so dominant that it could consume more than it produced. invest more than it saved, and finance it all by simply printing the global reserve currency. Other nations had to earn dollars through exports or attract investment. America just created them. By the 2000s, roughly 60% of global central bank reserves were held in dollars. Over 80% of international trade was denominated in dollars. Foreign entities held trillions in US Treasury bonds. The system seemed unshakable, eternal, almost divine in its permanence. But it had a hidden vulnerability. It required trust. It required nations to believe that holding dollars was safe, that America wouldn't abuse this privilege, that the system was neutral and beneficial for everyone. For decades, that trust held. But slowly, quietly, it began to crack. Fast forward to the 2020s. The world has changed. America's share of global GDP has declined from over 40% after World War II to around 25% today. China's economy has exploded, becoming the world's largest manufacturer and trader. The Middle East has diversified its relationships, and most critically, America has repeatedly weaponized the dollar system. Sanctions on Iran, sanctions on Russia, threats of sanctions on China, freezing central bank reserves, cutting countries from SWIFT. Each action made sense individually to policymakers in Washington. But collectively, they sent a message to the world. The dollar system isn't neutral infrastructure. It's a political weapon that can be turned on you at any moment. Saudi Arabia, watching this unfold, began making calculations. The kingdom had been America's most reliable Middle Eastern ally for 50 years. But times change. China is now Saudi Arabia's largest oil customer, buying over 1.7 million barrels per day. American oil production has surged, making the US less dependent on Middle Eastern imports. The strategic calculus that made the 1974 deal attractive to both sides was shifting. Then came the breaking point. In 2022, President Biden publicly declared he would make Saudi Arabia a pariah state over the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The Saudis asked for support on Yemen. America hesitated. They asked for advanced weapons systems. America added conditions. The relationship, once unshakable, was fraying. Meanwhile, China was offering an alternative. Massive infrastructure investments, technology transfers, partnership on Vision 2030, economic diversification, and crucially, no lectures, no conditions, no regime change pressures. Just business, just respect. In March 2022, China and Saudi Arabia discussed oil sales denominated in yuan. This wasn't just talk. Actual yuan-denominated oil futures had been trading in Shanghai since 2018. The infrastructure for an alternative system was being built. Then came June 9, 2024. The Petrodollar agreement, which had been quietly renewed for decades, expired. And this time, it wasn't renewed. Saudi Arabia announced it would accept payment for oil in multiple currencies. Dollars, yes, but also yuan, euros, yen, and even digital currencies. The financial media barely covered it. There were no dramatic headlines, but in central banks and finance ministries around the world, people understood. An era had ended. The monopoly was broken. The free lunch was over. Before we dive into what happens next, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This is the kind of financial earthquake that unfolds over years, not days, and you'll want to track how this story develops. Also, drop a comment. Did you even hear about the petrodollar agreement ending? Most people didn't, which is exactly why we need to talk about it. Let's continue. So what changed the moment the petrodollar died? On the surface, not much. Oil still trades. markets still function. Your gas station still pumps fuel. But beneath the surface, tectonic plates are shifting. First, let's talk about what the petrodollar system created. It generated what economists call the petrodollar recycling system. Here's how it worked. OPEC nations sold oil for dollars. They accumulated massive dollar surpluses. Those dollars got invested back into US Treasury bonds, American stocks, and US real estate. The money flowed back to America, financing our deficits and keeping interest rates low. Saudi Arabia alone holds over $135 billion in US Treasury bonds. Other Gulf states hold hundreds of billions more. This created a closed loop. America prints dollars, Middle East accepts them for oil, Middle East invests dollars back in America. The cycle repeats endlessly, with America benefiting at every stage. But now Saudi Arabia can accept yuan, euros, or yen. That breaks the loop. Chinese buyers can now purchase Saudi oil in yuan. Those yuan don't need to be recycled into US treasuries. They can be invested in Chinese bonds, used for Belt and Road projects, or converted to gold. The automatic demand for dollars just decreased. And it's not just Saudi Arabia. The United Arab Emirates announced similar policies. Kuwait is exploring alternatives. Even Iraq, despite heavy American influence, has discussed non-dollar oil sales. What was once unthinkable is now openly discussed at OPEC meetings. The numbers tell the story. In 2023, approximately 20% of global oil trade was settled in non-dollar currencies. That's up from virtually zero a decade ago. China has signed long-term contracts with Russia, Iran, and Venezuela for oil in yuan. India is buying Russian oil in rupees. Europe is exploring euro-denominated transactions to avoid dollar exposure and potential US sanctions. This might sound technical, but the implications are massive. Every percentage point of oil trade that moves away from dollars means less global demand for US currency. Less demand means lower value. Lower value means your dollars buy less. It's that simple. But there's another layer. The petrodollar system didn't just support the dollar through oil trade. It established the dollar as the default currency for all commodities: copper, wheat, iron ore, natural gas. Global commodity markets price in dollars. Why? Because oil did, and oil was the most important commodity. That precedent is now being challenged. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, representing over 40% of the world's population, is actively promoting trade in local currencies. Brazil and China just signed an agreement to trade in their own currencies, bypassing dollars entirely. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus new members, are developing alternative payment systems specifically designed to reduce dollar dependence. What we're witnessing isn't a sudden collapse. It's a gradual unwinding of 50 years of dollar dominance. And once these trends start, they're very hard to reverse. Let's talk about what this means for America. For half a century, the US has run persistent trade deficits. Americans consume far more than they produce. In 2023, the trade deficit exceeded $770 billion. That means America imported $770 billion more in goods and services than it exported. For any other country, this would be catastrophic. You can't buy more than you sell indefinitely. You run out of money. Your currency collapses. But America has been doing it for decades without consequence. Why? The petrodollar system. Foreign countries needed dollars for oil, so they were happy to sell us goods and accept dollars in return. Those dollars got invested back in US assets, financing our deficit. The cycle continued. We got real goods, electronics, cars, clothing. They got paper or digital dollars. We won. But what happens when they don't need dollars for oil anymore? What happens when they can buy energy in yuan or euros? Suddenly, the willingness to accept dollars for goods decreases. They start demanding more dollars for the same products. That's called inflation. And here's the terrifying part. The US national debt is now over $35 trillion. The government runs annual deficits exceeding $1.5 trillion. How does it finance this? By selling treasury bonds. Who buys them? Foreign countries with dollar surpluses from trade and oil sales. But if the petrodollar system collapses, those surpluses shrink. Foreign demand for treasuries falls. The US government has to offer higher interest rates to attract buyers. Higher interest rates on $35 trillion in debt means trillions more in annual interest payments. The deficit explodes. More borrowing is needed. A death spiral begins. We're already seeing early signs. China has reduced its treasury holdings from over $1.3 trillion to under $800 billion. Japan is selling treasuries to defend the yen. Saudi Arabia's treasury holdings have fluctuated as they diversify. When the biggest holders start selling, who's left to buy? The answer, historically, has been the Federal Reserve. The central bank prints money and buys treasuries itself. But that's money printing, which causes inflation. And unlike the past, when printed dollars flowed overseas, now they stay domestic. That inflation hits American consumers directly. We saw a preview during COVID. The Fed printed over $5 trillion. Inflation hit 9%, the highest in 40 years. Groceries became unaffordable for millions. Housing costs exploded. Real wages fell. That was with the petrodollar system still partially functioning. Imagine what happens when it fully collapses. But the American consumer isn't the only casualty. Think about what cheap imported goods have meant for American life. Your iPhone, made in China, priced affordably because of dollar strength and trade deficits. Your clothing, mostly imported, cheap because of the same system. Your car, even American brands, use imported parts. The average American household spends over 60% of its income on goods and services that are either imported or depend on imported components. When the dollar weakens significantly, all of that becomes more expensive. Economists estimate that losing reserve currency status could reduce American purchasing power by 20 to 30%. Let's make that concrete. If you spend $4,000 a month now, that same lifestyle would cost $5,000 to $5,200. Can your wages keep up? For most Americans, the answer is no. And it's not just consumer goods. America imports significant amounts of energy despite being a major producer. We import medical supplies and pharmaceuticals. We import critical minerals for technology and defense. All of that becomes more expensive as the dollar weakens. There's also a national security dimension. The US military operates over 750 bases in 80 countries. That global presence costs over $1 trillion annually when you include all related expenses. It's funded by dollar privilege, the ability to print money the world accepts. Without that privilege, maintaining global military dominance becomes fiscally impossible. Already, defense analysts are warning about the hollow military scenario. If fiscal constraints force cuts, America loses its ability to project power. Allies question security commitments. Adversaries become emboldened. The post-World War II order, built on American military and economic dominance, begins to crumble. Domestically, the social implications are profound. When living standards decline rapidly, people demand answers. Trust in institutions collapses. Political extremism surges on both left and right. We've seen this pattern in every country that's experienced currency crises. Weimar Germany, Argentina, multiple times, Venezuela, Turkey. The social fabric tears when economic security disappears. If this analysis is making you rethink what you thought you knew about the global economy, smash that like button and share this video. Understanding what's happening with the petrodollar is crucial for protecting your financial future. And most people have no idea this shift is even occurring. Comment below with your biggest concern about the dollar's future, and let's keep this conversation going. So who wins when the petrodollar dies? First, and most obviously, China. The yuan is now the second most used currency in global trade finance, jumping to over 5% of transactions. That's up from virtually nothing a decade ago. China has signed currency swap agreements with over 40 countries, allowing direct yuan trade without converting to dollars. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, dominated by China and Russia, actively promotes yuan usage. The Belt and Road Initiative, spanning 150 countries, increasingly uses yuan for financing. China isn't trying to make the yuan a global reserve currency overnight. That's not the strategy. Instead, they're creating a yuan zone for trade settlement, especially in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And it's working. ASEAN nations are increasing yuan usage. African countries are signing yuan infrastructure deals. Even some European companies are invoicing in yuan for China trade. Each transaction that bypasses the dollar is a small win for China and a small loss for America. Russia, despite, or perhaps because of Western sanctions, has also benefited. Being cut from the dollar system forced Russia to develop alternatives. The result? Stronger economic ties with China, India, and the global south. Russia now prices its commodities in rubles, yuan, or gold, forcing buyers to acquire these assets. This diversifies global reserves away from dollars by necessity. Oil-producing nations gain leverage. They're no longer locked into a single currency. They can negotiate better terms with buyers. China wants oil. Fine. Pay in yuan and invest in Saudi infrastructure. India wants oil. Pay in rupees and share defense technology. The monopoly position of the dollar meant oil producers had limited negotiating power. That's changing. Commodity-rich nations broadly benefit. With multiple reserve currencies emerging, these nations can play powers against each other. Need financing for a copper mine? Take bids in dollars, yuan, and euros. Choose the best terms. This is actually what a competitive market looks like, as opposed to the dollar monopoly. Gold benefits enormously. As trust in fiat currencies declines, central banks are stacking gold at record rates. In 2022 and 2023, central bank gold purchases exceeded 1,000 tons annually, levels not seen in decades. Gold requires no counterparty. It can't be sanctioned or frozen. It's the ultimate neutral reserve asset. And quietly, financial intermediaries like the UAE, Singapore, and Switzerland profit immensely. They become the bridges between the dollar world and the emerging multipolar currency system. Dubai's gold trade exploded. Singapore is now a major yuan clearing center. Swiss banks, as always, maintain profitable neutrality while facilitating transactions across systems. But perhaps the biggest winner is the concept of a multipolar world itself. For 50 years, the petrodollar gave America enormous geopolitical leverage. Don't follow American preferences on trade, human rights, or foreign policy. Face sanctions. Get cut from dollar markets. Watch your economy suffer. This leverage is weakening. Countries can increasingly ignore American pressure because they have alternatives. China provides financing. Russia provides energy. The global south provides markets. The dollar weapon is losing its edge. We're seeing this play out in real time. Saudi Arabia, once America's most reliable Middle Eastern ally, is now mediating between Iran and regional powers, often independently of U.S. interests. Turkey pursues its own agenda despite NATO membership. India maintains strategic autonomy, buying Russian oil despite American pressure. Even traditional U.S. allies are hedging. France's Macron talks about strategic autonomy for Europe. Germany is building deeper trade ties with China despite American concerns. South Korea and Japan, while still aligned with the U.S., are increasingly pragmatic about China relations. This isn't necessarily bad for global stability. A multipolar world could be more balanced, with power shared among major regions. But it's definitely bad for American dominance. And for Americans accustomed to their country being the unquestioned superpower, the adjustment will be psychologically difficult. So, what happens next? There are three realistic scenarios. Best case, America adapts. The government implements serious fiscal reform. Deficits are reduced dramatically through spending cuts and tax increases. The Federal Reserve maintains credibility through disciplined monetary policy. America negotiates a role in a multipolar currency system where the dollar remains important but shares reserve status with the yuan, euro, and possibly a BRICS mechanism. This requires political courage America hasn't shown in decades. It means touching Social Security and Medicare, the sacred cows of American politics. It means defense cuts at a time of rising global tensions. It means tax increases on the wealthy and middle class alike. It's theoretically possible, but politically unlikely. Middle case, gradual managed decline. This is the most probable scenario. The dollar's share of global reserves drops from around 60% to perhaps 40% over the next 10 to 15 years. American living standards stagnate and then slowly decline. Inflation persists at 4 to 6% rather than the Fed's 2% target. Growth slows. The US remains important, but no longer dominant. This is Britain's path after World War II. The pound lost reserve status gradually. Britain declined from superpower to important regional player. It was painful, but survivable. Living standards fell relative to other nations, but social collapse was avoided. This is probably America's future. Worst case, rapid disorderly collapse. A major treasury holder like China or Japan dumps bonds suddenly in response to a crisis. Interest rates spike. The US government can't finance deficits at reasonable rates. The Fed prints money aggressively to buy bonds. Hyperinflation follows. The dollar loses 50 to 70% of its value within a few years. International trade freezes. Global depression ensues. Social unrest and potentially military conflicts follow. This scenario, while unlikely, cannot be dismissed. Currency crises can happen shockingly fast. The 1997 Asian financial crisis destroyed currencies in months. Argentina has collapsed repeatedly. Turkey's lira lost 80% of its value in just a few years. When trust disappears, things move quickly. The critical variable is timing. If the transition happens slowly over decades, adjustment is possible. If it happens rapidly due to a trigger event, war over Taiwan, major debt crisis, sudden treasury dump, chaos becomes likely. We're approaching the conclusion, but this story is just beginning. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming deep dives on how to protect your wealth in a multipolar currency world and which assets might thrive as the dollar's dominance fades. Drop a comment with your prediction. Does America have 10 years of dollar dominance left? Or 50? Let's discuss. History offers sobering lessons. Every global reserve currency eventually falls. The Spanish dollar dominated for centuries, then the Dutch guilder, then the British pound. Each seemed permanent, unassailable, eternal, until suddenly they weren't. The pound sterling was the world's reserve currency for over a century. At its peak, the British Empire controlled a quarter of the world's land and population. The pound was backed by the world's most powerful navy, the most advanced industry, and global trade routes. It seemed unshakable. Then came World War I. Britain borrowed heavily. Then World War II deepened the debt crisis. By 1944, everyone knew the dollar would replace the pound. But the formal transition took decades. The pound remained in reserves through the 1970s. But Britain's relative decline was swift and painful. British living standards fell relative to America and continental Europe. The welfare state came under pressure. Industries declined. Brain drain accelerated as talent left for better opportunities abroad. Britain adapted and survived, but the adjustment was difficult, and the loss of prestige profound. America faces a similar transition. The petrodollar gave us 50 years of extraordinary privilege. We lived beyond our means, consumed more than we produced, and printed money without consequence. It was an anomaly, not a birthright. And like all anomalies, it's ending. The death of the petrodollar on June 9, 2024, was quiet. No crisis, no panic, just an agreement that expired and wasn't renewed. But this silent ending marks the beginning of a new era. An era where America must earn its prosperity rather than print it. Where the dollar competes rather than dominates. Where the bill for 50 years of free lunch comes due. The transition has begun. Whether it happens gradually or catastrophically depends on choices made in Washington, Beijing, Brussels, and Riyadh over the coming years. But one thing is certain. The world that emerges will look very different from the one Americans have known for half a century. The petrodollar is dead. The question now is what dies with it and what rises from the ashes.